Good evening, everyone. I just want to welcome you, and I'm just going to introduce our Women's Philanthropy Chair, Cheryl Moser.
Good evening. I'm Cheryl Moser, President of Women's Philanthropy. It's such a pleasure to be with you at our annual Lion of Judah and Pomegranate Society event. Tonight, we celebrate you, our amazing lion and palm donors. The pomegranate is one of 7 species whose first fruits were contributed to the ancient temple in Jerusalem. The Lion of Judah is fundamental to Judaism, our sacred symbol of strength and courage. Together, your strength and contributions to our community over generations has created this Milwaukee Jewish community and helped us to support so many as the needs have grown over the past few years. This week, we read the Torah portion of Vayishlach, where Jacob is given a new name, Israel, which has become the name of our people. The name Israel means one who struggled with God and has prevailed. The strong women leaders in our community can tell you that leadership is not without struggle, but our courageous women push forward even in the most challenging of times. As you will soon hear from Women's Philanthropy Campaign Chair, Sarah Hermanoff, you have enabled the Milwaukee Jewish Federation to have a profound impact this past year. Thank you for your partnership and support. It's an honor to be part of Women's Philanthropy with all of you. This is a dynamic group of communal leaders, and I cannot wait to see what we achieve in the year ahead as we move forward together. I want to thank our Women's Philanthropy staff for guiding our work together. Director Diane Zoll and Associate Director Robin Aronson. Robin, thank you for all you have done during your tenure with Women's Philanthropy, and we will definitely miss you as you move on to your new adventures. I also want to thank the Federation's strong women leaders who are ensuring Women's Philanthropy is a key contributor to a truly great organization. Board Chair Joan Lubar, Community Campaign Chair Judy Guten, Jewish Community Foundation Chair Andrea Schneider, Vice President of Philanthropy Julie Schack, and of course, Federation's President and CEO Miriam Rosenzweig. Finally, I want to thank the co-chairs for our event this evening, Tanya Arbit, Becca Garamek, Yoni Schwessel, and Andy Zimmerman. Together, they made tonight a lovely celebration of our lions and palms. Special thanks in advance to our guest speaker, Irin Carmon, co-author of Notorious RBG. Now, I am thrilled to present the 2022 JFNA Kipnis-Wilson Friedland Award to one of my role models, and I think it's safe to say someone who is a role model for each of us, Judy Guden. We are blessed to have Judy not just as part of Women's Philanthropy and the Federation, but as part of our Milwaukee community. Judy has always been a great leader, innovator, motivator, and friend. Judy was selected for this national award for a number of reasons, including exemplifying the spirit of the Lion of Judah through her commitment to tzedakah and tikkun olam, giving other women encouragement and opportunity, and setting a high standard in philanthropy and volunteerism. Judy has been a devoted leader for decades. She has chaired missions to Israel, served as Women's Division President, chaired the agency's Relations Community Planning Committee, and served as president of both the Federation and the JCC. Judy has also served as chair of Women's Division Campaign, chair of the Capital Campaign, and co-chair with Jerry Benjamin of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation's Reimagining Project. Additionally, Judy has been a member of the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design Board of Directors, and there is so much more. Judy is held in such high regard to everyone in our Milwaukee community for her tireless dedication to making a difference. Judy has been a Lion of Judah for over 30 years. No matter how many other professional and volunteer commitments, Judy has always remained deeply involved in women's philanthropy. She has also created a Lion of Judah endowment to ensure her generosity will live on forever. At times, I seek Judy's wisdom and advice, and she always has been a especially strong supporter of women's philanthropy's leadership. Leadership like Judy's is rare. Judy, you are truly an exceptional person, and I feel so fortunate to have worked alongside you, and every member of our community is fortunate for the intelligence and heart and soul you put into everything you do. I cannot think of anyone who is more deserving of this year's Kipnis-Wilson Friedland Award. I'm so glad we are able to be virtually together tonight to celebrate you among your beloved Lion of Judah and Pomegranates. On behalf of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation's Women's Philanthropy, it is my deepest honor to present Judy Guden with the Jewish Federation of North America's 2022 Kipnis-Wilson Friedland Award. Judy, along with the award recipients from other communities, will be honored at the upcoming International Lion of Judah Conference. It is now my pleasure to welcome Judy's dear friend, Betsy Green, who also received this prestigious award, to share her personal reflections about Judy.
I was honored to be asked to speak about my dear friend, Judy Guten. I met Judy when we were 6 years old, and both of our families rented cottages at Big Cedar Lake. It was like the Catskills, only with old cottages, no entertainment, and no food. We met again and really got to know each other in the 1980s through the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. It was also the time I got to know her children. We were even at her house when her daughter got ready for her first prom. We also attended her son's wedding in Chicago. Our families were very connected and never missed a milestone. Judy is a wonderful cook and a very gracious hostess. We attended many lavish dinner parties at her house. She is the best pea soup maker. And anytime someone isn't feeling well, Judy will say, "Do you want pea soup?" And everybody always says yes. I watched Judy move through the leadership ranks of the Milwaukee Women's Division of the Federation, and she eventually became president of the entire Federation. I finally remember our many Federation trips to Israel with Judy and Gary, and the night we talked about Richard Gere. Judy's accomplishments even go beyond the Federation. Judy also completed a master's program in organization and development and was employed by TEC, the executive committee, a peer-to-peer advisory, coaching, and educational organization for business executives. In her spare time, she also authored a book on fundraising. Eventually, Judy built her own consulting business and is still consulting today. All of her talents, she has always generously shared with our Jewish community. Judy, I can't tell you how proud Michael and I are of all your accomplishments. You excel in everything you do. You are well deserving of this prestigious award. Thank you so much for being such an extraordinary leader in our community. And thank you most of all for your friendship. Mazel tov.
Thank you, Betsy, for those kind words. And Judy, we would like to give you the floor.
Well, I only want a minute or two, but I don't know how many of you know the word verklempt. I didn't know that I'd feel so verklempt. This means so much to me. Just a line or two to Betsy first. So Betsy, I was so moved by your remarks. I asked that you speak for me. We're all blessed with wonderful friends, but you mentored me. You said the tough things to me out of love that if I wouldn't have heard, I might not have been able to grow in the way I grew. So of course I chose you. You mentored me. And when you talk about kids, I don't want to think about how many years ago our volunteer professional life started, but I have to tell you, my kids who are very adult, they're on this, they're sitting next to their children watching this. They were babies. So was that a clue for how long I've been listening to you, learning from you, and I continue to learn from you today. So whenever everyone here, I just have such a wonderful time going through the faces and going through the gallery. It's very special. I am so blessed to be part of our community. And as a woman, to be honored by women, this is of immeasurable importance and meaning for me. This is the Kipnis Award was given by women to a woman. And now when I look at you, women in leadership, those who are sitting in that chair, I'm happy to be sitting on the other side of the table, listening to you. What do I see when I see you? And I look very critically and very careful because you are the caretakers of the community that we all love. But I see women of purpose. You are women of purpose. You are women of vision. And as importantly, you are women who have the capacity to achieve your purpose. It's one thing to have purpose. It's another thing to have capacity to achieve your purpose. You have the capacity. So just as this community opened its arms to me and to my generation, its arms are wide open to all of you. So please continue to walk right in, because we are here ready to follow you. For I know what you all know, and I think about this often, you've often heard me say this, that with all the strength that we women bring to the table, we will make our world a better place. And it's your opportunity to lead us. And I, for one, am ready to follow you. So with so much appreciation to each and every one of you, I thank you. And now I just want to listen again. Thank you so much.
Mazel tov, Judy, and just Mazel tov. And now I'd like to hand it over to our Executive Director and CEO, Miriam Rosenzweig.
Judy, that was so beautiful. He's talked about women of purpose and women who achieve purpose. And I think that you are a woman who has helped so many of us achieve purpose. You have mentored leaders, whether they are volunteer or professional, but you have helped us achieve purpose to create better in this world and better for our community. One of the criteria for receiving this award, you can't just be an awesome woman. You have to be an awesome woman who's also a philanthropist, not just now, but for the future. You have to endow your lion. Thank you for the commitment of becoming a forever lion. You will always be counted in your legacy forever in taking care of the needs of the Jewish people and building a vibrant Jewish future in Milwaukee, Israel, and around the world. Now, I want to talk about this word philanthropy for a moment. Philanthropy literally means love of humanity, the love of people. And as many of you know, women's philanthropy hasn't always been called women's philanthropy. It used to be called the women's division. We heard it in Judy's introduction. Do you know who changed the name? It's our fearless leader, Joan Lubar, our current board chair. When Joan was taking the role of women's philanthropy chair, she knew the importance of recognizing women not just by their gender, but by their purpose for gathering and recognizing them as philanthropists, as leaders, and as role models like Judy and like everyone on the screen. Our federation now has a big responsibility, now more than ever. We have a huge mission. You could say it with me. We're going to take care of the needs of the Jewish people. We're going to build a vibrant Jewish future where this is the only task, Milwaukee, Israel, and around the world. We have to convene everyone. And I know that we're up for the challenge of these crucial tasks thanks to women's philanthropy. You power us through the especially tough times. Why? because you are a true philanthropist. You love the people. You love our Jewish community. And I want you to know that you have the Federation's utmost trust and our deepest respect for the impact that you make. Thank you for ensuring that we will always move forward together. It is now my pleasure to introduce my partner in crime, the person who gets me going every day, our great board chair, the phenomenal Joan Lubar.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you for those comments. First, I want to start out by congratulating Judy on this well-deserved and well-earned honor. You've always been a role model for me, and so thank you for that. I remember when I became Women's Philanthropy President, and I reached out to you, and you responded, and you told me, I'm in your back pocket. You can always count on me. And I love that. So thank you. It's such an honor to be with all of you tonight. Women's philanthropy is really where my heart is. It's where I started and where my leadership was nurtured and guided to hone my skills. It's through women's philanthropy that I got involved nationally. It led me to National Young Leadership Cabinet and later to National Women's Philanthropy, and then eventually to the Jewish Federations of North America's board, the executive committee, the Financial Resource Development Cabinet, Lion of Judah Endowment Committee, and now as chair of Jewish Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Women's philanthropy has opened up so many amazing opportunities for me and introduced me to some of my dearest friends. I know women's philanthropy is where your hearts are too. It shows through your unwavering generosity and commitment to Tikkun Olam. I am so thankful and encouraged that you understand it is our collective responsibility to respond to our community's most pressing needs. We must come together and move forward together to build a vibrant Jewish future. I'm also so appreciative of the remarkable women leaders here at our Federation and Women's Philanthropy. I especially want to recognize my partners, Federation Campaign Chair Judy Guten, my partner in crime and CEO Miriam Rosenzweig, Vice President of Philanthropy Julie Schack, and Women's Philanthropy President Cheryl Moser and her partner, Campaign Chair Sarah Hermanoff, and our Women's Philanthropy Director, Diane Zoll. And all these women have something in common. They are all members of Lions of Judah and Pomegranate societies. So on behalf of all of these fabulous leaders, I want to express that we are here for all of you. And we are deeply grateful for all that you selflessly do on behalf of our entire Jewish community. So now we are going to hear from our 4 event co-chairs, Yoni Schwessel, Tanya Arbit, Becca Garamek, and Andy Zimmerman, who each will share their own story, demonstrating how our unique voices come together to move women's philanthropy forward as one united, vibrant group. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tanya Arbit. Over 30 years ago, in the former Soviet Union, I saw the need to make changes for a better future for my son and me. It simply became a necessity for me to take the lead. My journey brought me here to Milwaukee, where the Jewish community, under the Milwaukee Jewish Federation's leadership, helped my son and me to start new life. Our Jewish Federation is a central organization, the one address that is in the best position to organize all of us in times when we see real need. For me, it was natural to become part of our Jewish community, then to become a lion. And last year, Bruce and I created a Lion of Judah endowment. I always try to give back. I'm so lucky to be among and learn from the wisdom of best female leaders and my personal role models, like Betsy Green, Judy Guten, Marlene Lavasser, Ari Goodman, and many, many others. In fact, tonight, I'm proud to wear the line of Judah pin that belonged to my mother-in-law, Naomi Arbet, who is here with us tonight. What could be powerful more than us women taking the lead in uniting Jewish power? For me, ultimately, it's not what I do, but why I do it, and that we do it together. That together we create the enduring Jewish community we all want, that is based on shared goals and Jewish values. It's up to me, and I know it is important for all of us who are here today to make sure that our sons, our daughters, and their future generation have a safe place to be and to thrive. Thank you.
Well said, Tanya. I'm Becca Garamek. We moved here from Canada 20 years ago, and we were looking for a place to live. We had an infant son and no family or friends in the area yet, so we knew we'd be relying on the Jewish community, and we figured we'd want to live near the JCC. After enrolling our baby in Gan Ami, I soon became involved with and eventually chaired the JCC Parenting Center. That's where it all began. Shortly after that, I attended a Women's Philanthropy annual lunch meeting because it sounded exciting. I felt as though I was instantly surrounded by friends. I went on to volunteer for Women's Philanthropy, and I've been hooked ever since. I'm currently serving on multiple boards, committees of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation and its agencies, and it feels especially meaningful to be helping during these difficult times. I'm extremely excited to co-chair the Lion Division with Tanya Arbet, who's a very dear friend, whom I met on the Israel at 60 mission with the Federation. Being a Lion is new for me, and it was my gift to myself when I turned 50 during the pandemic. I'm so glad I joined because during the past 18 months, I've seen firsthand the fantastic job that the Federation did with all of the emergency planning and allocations. I'm especially proud to have been able to help with those incredibly difficult planning decisions. My sons are now young adults, and even though they live far away, for now, I want to continue to help grow and strengthen the community that became our family and our home.
Thanks, Becca. I'm Yoni Schwessel, and I'm originally from New York. Over the past 20 years that I've lived in Milwaukee, I, like Joan and Judy mentioned, have met and grown from so many people through my involvement in Federation. Past Women Division Director, Evie Garfinkel, was a real mentor for me. She taught me a piece of wisdom that I use all the time: replace yourself. Evie taught me to be a team player, to hand over my ideas to others to implement and execute so it doesn't just fall on me. This is a great example of being stronger together. I really appreciate all I've learned while I was on the Agency Review Council under the amazing leadership of Sarah Hermanoff and Barbara Glazer. They opened my mind to the incredible programs that the Federation supports and encouraged me to ask questions to bring about the best partnership between the Federation and the federated agencies. People used to say to me, why should I give to the Milwaukee Jewish Federation versus giving to individual organizations? Being on the board of the Federation and being a teacher in two different schools, Torah Academy and the Milwaukee Jewish Day School, I've seen firsthand how the Federation has stepped in to help, especially in terms of safety, with technology, with PPE and the coronavirus. None of us could do this on our own. The Federation works together with the entire community in a way that nobody else could. Federation is really a partner for the people, and that's what motivates me to be involved in women's philanthropy.
Thank you, Yoni. I'm Andy Zimmerman. I grew up in the north suburbs of Chicago. I watched as my parents volunteered in the community. I first got involved with Federation through a mission to Israel after college. Several years later, my husband Mike and I, along with our then 2-year-old daughter Allie, moved to the Milwaukee community. I knew I would want to follow the example that my parents set by being a volunteer and supporting the Jewish community. I signed Allie up for summer camp at the JCC and enrolled her in the JCC's preschool that fall. I also spent many years involved with the Mequon-Thiensville School District while my kids were growing up. I volunteered at Congregation Shalom, Hello Milwaukee, and the JCC. I have been a dedicated supporter and volunteer to the Milwaukee Jewish Federation and, of course, Women's Philanthropy. It has always been very important to me to give back to the community. I believe it is my responsibility. When Diane first asked me to share my story, I didn't actually feel like I had that much of a story to share compared to some of my co-chairs. I watched the example set by my parents and pretty much followed in their footsteps as an avid supporter of our Jewish community. But I realize my story is not unlike many of yours, and many of you can probably relate to my experience. Each one of our stories is special in its own way. Collectively, we make up Women's Philanthropy in this amazing Jewish community.
Thank you for sharing your incredible stories. We have wonderful members of our community with a variety of backgrounds, all working towards the same goal. This also includes Judy Guten, who I want to thank for her commitment and enthusiasm as our campaign chair. I'm excited to work with her this year. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Hermanoff, and as the current Women's Philanthropy Campaign Chair, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you for being dedicated members of our Lion of Judah and Pomegranate Society. Last year was our rainy day, and we collectively increased our gifts to enable impactful Federation community planning and allocations. You stepped up to ensure a strong and safe Jewish community. And here are just a few of the many highlights from this past year of the impact you made. We addressed food insecurity. In conjunction with the USDA, we distributed over 100 tons of food to 854 Jewish children. We ensured synagogue members could safely congregate by providing outdoor tents and technology for virtual worship and education. We addressed the needs of isolated seniors with over 2,700 wellness phone calls while linking individuals to available social services. Addressing the increase in mental health concerns, we funded suicide prevention workshops and supplied $50,000 for our school's mental health professionals. And by investing $50,000 in a tax attorney, we were able to secure over $30 million in federal grants and loans that help more than 80 Jewish organizations and businesses. And as we move out of the pandemic, we know our community continues to have needs related to a dramatic growth in anti-Semitism and related demand for increased security. At the same time, we want to ensure our Jewish organizations continue to function from a position of strength. And as we all cherish, Milwaukee is a wonderfully unique place to celebrate being Jewish, and our collective giving will continue to create the space for Jewish engagement and joyful experiences. Thank you. You are all truly appreciated, and we are excited to connect with each of you personally to catch up and talk about support for this coming year. If you have not yet made your gift to the annual campaign and the Fund for Jewish Milwaukee, we encourage you to do so as soon as possible. Please consider an increase so we can meet the most pressing needs of our community. And the sooner you make your gift, the sooner we can allocate your dollars to our community. We are all moving forward together. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Heidi Goodman, Marlene Lauwasser, and Susan Angel Miller.
The lion represents the strength, power, and courage of the Jewish people and reminds us of God's protection. Just as the lion symbolizes God's protection over the Jewish people, these Lions of Judah endowment gifts help to protect and provide for continued strength of our community as well. By endowing your lion gift, you will be joining the circle of women known as Forever Lions, who are passionate about the sustainability and excellence of our vibrant Jewish community continuing into future generations. Our Forever Lions are wonderful modern-day representatives of the sacred lion.
That is a powerful legacy. The foresight and commitment these generous women have provided through their giving ensures that our Federation campaign starts with a solid foundation each and every year. I know that my own endowment will help our community remain strong and vibrant for generations to come. I am honored to support the Federation's work, which has brought so much joy to my life after I am gone. I strongly encourage each of you to consider becoming a Forever Lion. We hope that you will join Heidi and me in knowing that you are caring for our beautiful Milwaukee Jewish community forever.
You're never too young or too old to become a Forever Lion, and really, the process is quite simple. A Jewish Community Foundation endowment professional, a financial advisor, or a legal advisor can design a Forever Lion endowment to help you realize your philanthropic vision through an endowment, bequest, or life insurance policy.
When you endow your Lion gift, you will be recognized as a Lion now and forever. You will know that the Jewish community that you care about today will be sustained from generation to generation. L'dor v'dor. I know this gives you a lot to think about. Today, Heidi and I really just wanted you to start considering the possibility of embarking on your own Forever Lion journey, if you haven't already. I can say from personal experience, it will mean so much to you and to our community.
I know this is
Thank you.
recording because they never want to wear in the same.
I'm proud to have endowed my $5,000 Lion gift about 5 years ago. I was inspired by others and didn't see any reason to wait. Tonight, I'm excited to tell you about an opportunity known as a donor-advised philanthropic fund that has tax advantages and makes giving to nonprofits easier. It's a charitable account that my husband and I have benefited from, and I think it's something that more people should know about. Donor-advised funds can be opened with as little as $2,500 and provide the convenience of a philanthropic checking account. When you make grants to whatever nonprofit organization you choose, Jewish or non-Jewish. And an added benefit that I was recently reminded of is that if you start a philanthropic fund with $5,000, the Jewish Community Foundation will actually match your first grant to any Jewish community organization up to $500. Setting up a donor-advised fund is an opportunity for everyone and a win-win. If you're already giving donations to the Federation, your synagogue, or other charities, I'd encourage you to learn more. Thanks.
Thank you, Heidi, Marlene, and Susan for sharing such inspirational messages about endowing our gifts and donor-advised funds. You have given us a lot to think about. It is our honor to have Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Dallet here with us tonight. Justice Dallet will be moderating the questions and answer session with our guest speaker, Irin Carmon, following Irin's talk. Justice Dallet has spent more than 2 decades fighting to ensure justice for the people of Wisconsin. Justice Dallet is a strong supporter of Federation and women's philanthropy and has served on the boards of both. Justice Dallet is also a proud Lion of Judah. I could not think of anyone better to introduce our very special guest. Please welcome Rebecca Dallet.
Thank you, Diane. It is now my pleasure to introduce our very special keynote speaker, Irin Carmon, co-author of Notorious RBG, The Life and Times of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The book has been a national sensation and was on the New York Times bestseller list for 3 months. It was described by the Times, quote, as if a scrapbook and the Talmud decided to have a baby. In 2017 and 18, Irin teamed up with the Washington Post and reporter Amy Britton to break the news of sexual harassment and assault allegations against Charlie Rose, and CBS's knowledge of his conduct. That work won a 2018 Mirror Award from the Newhouse School at Syracuse University. Irin is currently a senior correspondent of New York Magazine. She previously was a national reporter at MSNBC and NBC News, reporting on gender, politics, and the law, and she was a staff writer at Salon and Jezebel. In 2011, Irin was on Forbes 30 Under 30 in the media list. Not surprisingly, Irin speaks frequently across the country on women's leadership and rights. I am very excited to hear from Irin tonight. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Irin.
Thank you so much, Justice Dallet. And wow, I love the RBG tribute in your outfit. And I should first start out by saying that it's been so wonderful to get to hear so much about the community and the work that you all are doing, truly in the spirit of RBG. I'll talk more about her commitment to Tikkun Olam, but I feel the spirit of RBG underpinning all of the work that you're doing, each using the talents that you have in the world to repair tears as you see them. And I also want to congratulate Judy for the Kipnis-Wilson Friedland Award. I truly feel, having heard you speak even very briefly, that your clients are lucky and that your friends are lucky, and the community of Milwaukee is so lucky to have such a powerful and generous person, generous of their time, generous of their resources and their learning. It's been wonderful for me to get to hear so much about such a tight-knit and supportive community that lifts up women in their capacities as philanthropists and as leaders. Thank you very much for having me tonight. I want to share with you a story of a Jewish woman who got loud and also used her talents in such a way. You know, it's interesting looking at Justice Dallet wearing the collar and looking at those of you who are wearing the Lions of Judah around your neck. I think I will aptly start this story by drawing attention to Justice Ginsburg's neckwear. She too liked a snazzy accessory. In this particular instance, she is wearing her dissent collar. Now, I had the opportunity a few times to sit down with Justice Ginsburg, and on one occasion, during the time that we were fact-checking the book, I showed her this image and I asked her, "Is this your dissent collar?" And she looked very closely because she was a very precise woman, and she said, "Yes, this is my dissent collar." Why is Justice Ginsburg wearing her dissent collar in this sketch, which you may know the Supreme Court of the United States does not allow cameras even to this day. Now we get to listen to the live streams. But an illustrator sits inside the court and captures important moments. And this particular moment in 2013, Justice Ginsburg had stayed up all night. She later told me that her pen was hot, a very notorious pronouncement. And she put on her dissent collar. And typically, the justice that is in the majority speaks and delivers a summary of the majority opinion. It's much more rare for the justice who is dissenting, at least at the US Supreme Court, Justice Dallet, you'll have to tell me how it's done on your court. It's much more rare, just for reasons of decorum and time, for the justice who's in the dissent to speak in the room. And so when a justice chooses to do so, they are drawing attention to the issue at hand for a reason. The New York Times actually once described dissenting from the bench, as they call it, as being like arguing with your spouse in front of the dinner guests. It just isn't done very often. But on this particular week in 2013, Justice Ginsburg dissented from the bench, again, made everybody listen to her protest of the majority's opinion 3 times, thus breaking a record. And on this day, the 3rd day that she dissented from the bench, the reason she wanted to use her voice was in dissenting from a majority opinion in the case called Shelby County versus Holder that struck down a core provision of the Voting Rights Act known as preclearance, in which states had to ask for permission to pass voting restrictions that could disproportionately impact marginalized populations. Justice Ginsburg said getting rid of preclearance when it has worked and is continuing to work is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. And she later said, and I'm thinking a lot about Wisconsin as I say this, she later said that as she predicted, the storm came and we were without an umbrella. But just one more note about the neckwear, on a much lighter note. I had the distinct honor of having Justice Ginsburg officiate at my wedding in 2017. And many people asked us, what is Justice Ginsburg going to wear? And I didn't know, and I didn't know if I could really ask her. And my husband said, as long as it's not the dissent color. So you can see from the image next to me that Justice Ginsburg did not dissent from our nuptials. And one of her clerks who had the similar honor of having Justice Ginsburg officiate at his wedding told my co-author that his wife said that because Justice Ginsburg pronounced them married in the power endowed to her by the US Constitution, that to get divorced would be unconstitutional. I like to tell my husband this every once in a while. But more importantly, when Justice Ginsburg was dissenting that day from the bench, putting on her snazzy dissent collar, she was doing so in a particular manner that was asking the world to pay attention to what she believed to be grievous harm being done by the majority. She used these unorthodox ways of expressing herself because all else had failed inside the conference where the justices vote. And so what she wanted was for the world outside the courtroom to hear her. And that is, in fact, what happened, because after the Shelby County versus Holder decision, this happened, which is that my co-author, Shauna, who was a law student at the time, was so inspired by Justice Ginsburg's ringing dissent that she decided to create a tribute to her on the internet, known as Notorious RBG. At the time, not that much was known about Justice Ginsburg, except for if you had gone to law school as she had, you might learn about some pretty important discrimination cases. But Shauna felt like in what she really felt to be the darkness, Justice Ginsburg's voice was like a beacon of light. And she wanted to celebrate that in a kind of young person's vernacular. So before you ask me who is this Notorious, which is actually what Justice Ginsburg herself asked the clerks, she liked to say, well, of course, we're both from Brooklyn. And I heard somebody say they're from New York City. So Justice Ginsburg embraced the nickname. One of the other things that you could say that the rapper Notorious B.I.G. and Justice Ginsburg had in common is that each used their words in protest, sometimes when all other things had been lost, although there were a great many differences between us. Notorious B.I.G.'s son later said he thought his father would have loved the mashup and the nickname, so we were really honored by that. So this all began as a kind of spontaneous celebration of Justice Ginsburg's voice. It wasn't planned to be anything. It was just kind of a fun thing that Shauna threw up on the internet. But at the same time, there were these spontaneous celebrations of Justice Ginsburg's voice just kind of popping up out of nowhere. And keep in mind that she was, at the time, 80 years old. Typically not a time in which women are lifted up or celebrated. But you can't spell truth without Ruth posters started popping up around Washington, D.C. People started putting Justice Ginsburg's face on their nails. This one is called Justice Ginsburg Smites Her Enemies, with her words. Lego RBG. I believe that she was the only Supreme Court justice to have a repeat character, a recurring character on Saturday Night Live. And of course, this is very controversial, the tattoos. So I had an opportunity to first interview Justice Ginsburg in 2015. And I brought with me an iPad and I had the tattoos ready. It was an on-camera interview, ran on the Rachel Maddow show. And I was getting ready to ask her, what does it mean to you that so many young people are so inspired by you at the age of 80 that they're tattooing your face on their arms. And I just have to show you, here's another set of the tattoos. This is what Justice Ginsburg looked like when I showed her the tattoos. And at that point, I remembered that in addition to being an icon, a cultural icon, and a legal icon, she was also a bubby. Because the next words out of her mouth were, "Why would you do something so permanent?" She said, "At least when my granddaughter got a nose ring, you could take that out." And I said, you know, because they admire you. And so, fun side story is that subsequently, Notorious RBG, the book was, we wrote it together, we finished it, we fact checked it, we sent a finished version to Justice Ginsburg to make sure that we hadn't made any mistakes. Among the more terrifying things I have done is send a final manuscript to Justice Ginsburg, and of course she still managed to find errors. And she was being honored with the 5 Freedoms Award, and I was at the reception, and she saw me across the way. And by this point, the book had not yet come out yet, but it had been printed, hadn't been distributed. And she summoned me over, and I'm about to have a heart attack, because even though she was such a gracious person, it was a huge honor to be part of telling her story and a big responsibility. And she said, "Irin, I need to tell you something." And I'm holding my breath, and the first thought that I have is that she's going to ask me to burn all copies of the book, even though she's a champion of the First Amendment. This makes no sense, but this is what I'm thinking. And she says, "The tattoos really go too far. Can you tell people to not get tattoos of my face?" And so I promised to pass on the message, although I personally believe your body, your choice. If you want to get a tattoo of Justice Ginsburg's face, that's totally up to you. I won't stop you. Send us a picture. But in all seriousness, it turned out that this spontaneous celebration really spoke to a hunger that people had to see a woman in the highest position of power imaginable in the United States to date, who was not just a woman in that spot, but also using her position to advocate for justice, for equality, for civil liberties, including religious freedom, in particular religious freedom for minorities. And the person that she was, the person that she had become, even before she reached the US Supreme Court, was deeply shaped by her Jewish identity. The leader that she was, the values that she held, were shaped by her connection to the Jewish community and by challenging it. And so I want to start with the most important woman, the most important Jewish woman in her life was her mother, Celia Amster Bader. She grew up in a Yiddish-speaking home on the Lower East Side. She worked as a bookkeeper in the garment district. She actually, I believe she was in utero when her parents emigrated from the old country, Celia. She longed for her daughter to have the education that she herself was denied. And so instead, she poured all of her hopes into young Ruth as she raised her in Brooklyn. And she taught her daughter about Jewish women of valor. 2 that came to mind were Emma Lazarus, whose words were etched on the plaque of the Statue of Liberty. And by the way, we intentionally got married within view of the Statue of Liberty, and Justice Ginsburg cited this. Also, Lillian Wald, who worked to improve conditions in the tenements. The overall message that Celia had for her daughter was to be a lady and to be independent. So I mentioned that she was shaped by her Jewishness. She actually went to Jewish summer camp. This is a photo of her as the camp rabbi. But you know, it's interesting because she was really drawn to this Jewish study of text, which makes a lot of sense when you realize what she ended up doing with her life. But she suddenly realized that there were things that the boys could do that the girls could not. And as she, you know, for example, at the time, there were no bat mitzvahs, no bat mitzvot. She was very impressed by the fact that Elena Kagan had actually fought to have the first bat mitzvah in her congregation. And as she made her way through her education, she began to keep a secret. And that secret was that her mother, Celia, the most important person in the world to her, had cervical cancer. She was diagnosed when Ruth was only a young teenager, and she became more gravely ill throughout her high school years. And so every day Ruth would come home and she would do her homework on her mother's bed, by her mother's bed, because she knew that it made her mother feel better to see her achieve things that she had not yet been able to achieve. And it's interesting because we know when we interviewed Justice Ginsburg's friends, they all said that they didn't know about any of this. She was a bright, outgoing girl. They didn't know that she had this secret pain at home. So I asked her, why didn't you tell anyone? She said she didn't want anybody to feel sorry for her. From the beginning, her experience of pain and loss really shaped the kind of stoic person that she would become. And she did achieve one of her mother's dreams, which is that she was chosen to speak at her high school graduation. However, the day before that speech, her mother passed, and she was never able to make it to that graduation. But her mother left behind, somehow during the Depression, she had managed to secretly save thousands of dollars that she put towards her daughter's education in the hope that her daughter could have the life that she had only dreamed of. Now at Cornell, she met a nice Jewish boy. This is very important because I think if she hadn't met Marty Ginsburg, she might not have had the environment that allowed her to succeed. She always used to say that Marty was the only boy who ever cared that she had a brain. And even though women at Cornell at the time in the 1950s were encouraged to hide their smarts, on the contrary, the two of them talked about studying the same thing. She sort of guided him to law, in part because her community was being targeted, in fact, by Joseph McCarthy, both at Cornell and in Brooklyn. McCarthyism came for their community. And her government professor who mentored her pointed out that it was lawyers who were fighting for the First Amendment, who were fighting for freedom of association, for the freedom to pursue ideas and ideologies under the First Amendment. And she also noticed that being a lawyer was a nice profession, and she was a motherless girl whose father had fallen on hard times. So she was also very practical. The two of them got married, and there was a slight detour in Oklahoma where she, about a year after they got married, Marty was drafted and they were living on a military base in Oklahoma when she discovered that she was pregnant. And she made the innocent mistake of telling the Social Security office where she was working at the time that she was pregnant. Well, they promptly demoted her several ranks and told her that just before the baby came, she would have to leave. And it was one of the very first lessons that she received in the unfortunate reality of the time, and unfortunately now too, about the ways reproduction is used to limit women's opportunities outside of their own choices. But she did, in fact, make it to Harvard Law School, where she was one of only 9 women. And she was the only mother. She said that, well, actually, I want to tell the story very quickly, that there was this moment that the dean of the law school invited all 9 of those women over and asked them a question. Now, keep in mind, she's so excited. She's so thrilled to come to law school. And he says, I have a question for each one of these women, and to go around the room and for each of them to answer. How can you justify taking the place of a man? And I think this is the only documented time that Ruth Bader Ginsburg lied, because she said that she wanted to become a lawyer to be a better wife to her husband. I don't think that's why she wanted to become a lawyer. Excuse me. Now, I mentioned that she was the only mother in her class, as if it was not enough to juggle being in law school, being a mother, and being one of the only women, actually one of only 2 women on the law review, the prestigious law review. In her 2nd year, Marty's 3rd year, the family made a discovery. And that was that Marty was diagnosed with testicular cancer, another moment in which cancer would shadow her life. she flew into action. She was determined not to lose her new family the way she had lost her natal family. And so that's the point where she realized that she could survive on about 2 hours of sleep. She stayed up all night caring for Marty, typing up his papers from notes that his classmates had taken. And then at some point at like 2 a.m, she would start her own work. She eventually graduated from Columbia, where she transferred to be closer to her husband's job, tied for first in her class, despite all of that. So she was a pretty extraordinary person. But despite how extraordinary she was, nobody would hire her. She used to say that she had 3 strikes against her. She was a woman, she was a mother, and she was a Jew. Now, what's interesting is to think back and realize that all of those so-called strikes were also her strengths. They were also things that allowed her to see the world differently, that allowed her to imagine a world in which being from a minority religion, an underrepresented gender, or were not downsides, but rather gifts to understand parts of the world that too often shut out of public life. Now, she actually eventually got a job at Rutgers University Law School, and that was when the dean actually told her and possibly pay her what they paid a man, because her husband made a good salary. And in 1963, she got the huge surprise that despite being told that Marty's cancer treatment made him infertile, she was actually pregnant. She hid her pregnancy this time, having learned the lesson of the way she was discriminated against the first time. Now, by the late 1960s, the world was beginning to change. There were students who were showing up, female students who were showing up, and they imagined a different world. She had for so long quietly accepted all of the things that had been handed to her, all of the ways in which she had been held back for reasons that had nothing to do with her talent, her ability, or her character. And I always think it's really significant that she actually only imagined herself as a feminist pretty late in life. She was already a mother of 2. She was in her late 30s. And it was actually the younger generation that challenged her and wanted a class on women in the law. And that led her to go to the library and read and see that for 100 years, the Supreme Court had said that it was acceptable to discriminate against women as long as you told them that it was a favor. As long as you said that precisely because women could be mothers, you could put them in a separate category and tell them that it was a pedestal, but you could deny them access to the decision-making in the world. And for a long time, they had said, these justices, these 100% male justices, had said that that was not only endowed by the Constitution, but by God. And so it was that beginning in 1969, 1970, roughly, Ruth Bader Ginsburg realized that she had the capacity to do something that had never been done before, building on the activist work of others, building on the intellectual theories of people like Pauli Murray, but that she had the ability to take across the finish line the radical notion that women deserved equality in the eyes of the Constitution. And so in a series of cases, bit by bit, working incrementally one step at a time, she won 6 cases at the US Supreme Court that actually undid that precedent that had said that you could treat women differently, but that, as she said in front of these justices, it was not a pedestal, but rather a cage. Now, she said, RBG, that she was inspired by the Talmudic tradition of arguing over the text, right? I mentioned that she was the camp rabbi, and then she became a lawyer whose job it was to argue over the text. And so even when she became first a judge on the DC Circuit and then a justice on the US Supreme Court, she continued in that spirit of questioning and challenging while also respecting the work of generations before. In fact, when she was nominated for the US Supreme Court, she stood in the Rose Garden next to Bill Clinton, and she thanked her mother. She said that she wished that her mother had lived to see a world, or that she had grown up in a world in which daughters were cherished as much as sons. And she also, when she moved into the US Supreme Court, she put on the walls of her chambers the Hebrew words from Deuteronomy, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof. Justice, justice shalt thou pursue. And she said, those words are an ever-present reminder of what judges must do that they may thrive. She said, there is an age-old connection between social justice and Jewish tradition. And justice she did pursue for as long as she could. She continued to show up and speak out and do the work, even when she was outnumbered, even in 3 bouts of cancer, even when she lost Marty in 2010, she was sitting on the bench the very next day to hand down an opinion related to religious freedom, even when she broke her ribs twice. And I think a lot about what Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt said at Justice Ginsburg's eulogy. She said, to be born into a world that does not see you, that does not believe in your potential, that does not give you a path for opportunity or a clear path for education, and despite this, to be able to see beyond the world that you're in, to imagine that something can be different, that is the job of a prophet. And it is a rare prophet who not only imagines a new world, but makes that new world a reality in her lifetime. This was the brilliance and vision of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so beside me, you can see that interview that I mentioned that I did with Justice Ginsburg. When I asked her in 2015, when the time comes, what would you like to be remembered for? And she said, somebody who used whatever talent she had to do her work to the very best of her ability and to help repair tears in her society, to make things a little better through the use of whatever ability she has. Of course, everybody who's listening to this knows that she could have just said the words tikkun olam, but she was choosing to use words that everybody could understand, but that all of us would hear how deeply Jewish a commitment that was. And so I want to share with you just a couple of the very quick lessons that I take away from Justice Ginsburg's life and work. She used to say that you should fight for the things you care about, but do so in a way that would lead others to join you. Famously, one of her very best friends on the US Supreme Court was Justice Scalia. They didn't agree on anything, but they tried to foster a spirit of friendship and collegiality, even when it was in dissent. And she was part of movements. And of course, being part of social movements and public service organizations means building bridges to other communities and other coalitions with different values, and doing so respectfully. She taught me about perseverance and tenacity. Although to my great regret, she could not live forever, she stuck it out for as long as she could. And she used to do these push-ups. I mean, it's actually insane. She was exactly 50 years older than me. And I once worked out with her trainer, who she told to work us out hard. And he did. And I asked her, is it really true that you can do 20 push-ups? And she said, yes, but I do 10 push-ups, I take a breath, and then I do 10 more. And so I always think, okay, first of all, she's very precise. She was very precise. And then second of all, that breath is important too. The tenacity and the perseverance don't happen without giving yourself a chance to breathe in between. And of course, when all else fails, using your voice in dissent is something that I learned from Justice Ginsburg. When you've tried to build those bridges, when you've done everything you can, when you've done all of the work, then dissents, she used to say, speak to a future age. And so as we mourn Justice Ginsburg's loss and we contemplate the bittersweet reality that in her loss, the change that she was warning of the damage that she was warning of has accelerated in her absence, in part because of her absence. It's incumbent on all of us who share her values to continue that work. I am reminded of Pirkei Avot. The quote is, "You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." And so for as long as she could, Justice Ginsburg did not abandon the work, but she certainly did not act alone in the causes of equality and justice. And she always tried to make that very clear. And even, on the day that she became Notorious RBG, she quoted the famous Martin Luther King Jr. line about the arc of history bending towards justice. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, is the full quote. But I think it's really important that Justice Ginsburg added her own very RBG line that's so relevant to all the work that you're all doing tonight. She said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Then she added, "If there is a steadfast commitment to see the task through to completion." If there is a steadfast commitment to see the task through to completion, the work that you're doing every day, steadfastly seeing the task through to completion, is in that spirit. And she did so for as long as she could. Her prophetic vision helped us improve the tears in the world for as long as she could. And the rest is up to all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Irin, really for giving us an insight into one of my role models, Justice Ginsburg, both through your book and through your words tonight. So we really thank you. I have just a couple questions to follow up on, hopefully some things that people are wondering about. The first one that I know we're all really curious about, is it really true that Justice Ginsburg did not cook anything after 1980? And how in the heck did she accomplish that?
So she had a really devoted husband, and also he didn't want to eat a bite of what she ate. So I think he just realized he had to take over. I mean, he used to tell stories about how when they were first married, and they got married, I think it was 1953, so it was fully expected that she would do all the cooking. And so she produced some kind of tuna casserole, and he just wanted to throw the whole thing out. And during that time that they were in Oklahoma, he actually had like a French cookery book, and he started making his way through it. So at first he would only cook the special occasions. And then when she became a judge, he fully had an excuse to have her never cook again. And after he passed away, her daughter Jane would actually fill her freezer with frozen meals. So I don't think she even knew how to turn on the stove to boil water at the end, according to her granddaughter. But I will say also, she really liked to go out. It was kind of crazy to see, her pop up in people's photos at the theater, at the opera. She maintained, at least until the pandemic, a really, really active social life. So that was part of it as well. I mean, she was out on the town, which was truly incredible to me, because
Yes.
I wanted to be home at that time.
That's great. So I know a lot of the way that Justice Ginsburg looked at
Sorry,
the
I'm so sorry to stop you.
Go ahead.
One thing I wanted to tell about Marty cooking. This is a little bit of an inappropriate story, but I know everyone here has a sense of humor. When I asked Justice Ginsburg which recipe from Marty we should put in the book, because there had been a cookbook in Marty's honor that had been put out, we wanted to excerpt one of his recipes in Notorious RBG. And she thought for a minute and she said, pork loin cooked in milk. And I was honestly speechless, because I knew that she wasn't very observant, but literally pork loin cooked in milk. And my then boyfriend, now husband, broke the silence by saying, as long as it's not cooked in its mother's milk. And she burst out laughing. And then she told that story at our wedding. But her son always said, when he saw it, he was like, I can't believe that's the recipe that mom gave you. We always said, God forbid the rabbi find out about this.
That's great. Thank you. So Justice Ginsburg had a kind of, I think, a little bit of a unique view of feminism. And so I'm curious to hear you tell us about that. And especially, you you mentioned this a little bit, but how do you think she would view the status of feminism today, especially in light of a lot of the restrictions that have been placed on women's reproductive rights?
Well, one thing that I didn't get the chance to get into, but that is a very core part of Justice Ginsburg's legacy, is that she believed that feminism was not just about women's liberation, but also about men's liberation. And specifically that if men did not understand that caregiving, whether it was for elderly family members or for children, was also not just their duty, but also their blessing, then women also wouldn't be able to participate in public life in the same way. And that's one of the reasons that she brought so many cases on behalf of men, including Stephen Weisenfeld, who was a widower who was denied the same benefits for caring for his son that he would have gotten if he was a woman. And what she wanted to show was that these restrictive gender roles were limiting a child, in this case, who wasn't getting the same benefits, the husband who was being stereotyped, the father who was being stereotyped as not being paternal, and the mom who had passed away, whose wages were not being counted the way they would have been if she was a man. And then secondly, she fought very hard for women's equal citizenship status, and she strongly believed that women's equal citizenship status could not be achieved without full reproductive freedom. Whether that was the choice to give birth, she actually represented a servicewoman who the army was trying to force to have an abortion. She also brought the first federal case against forcible sterilization of Black women in North Carolina when she was at the ACLU. And she was a staunch defender of contraception and of abortion. And she believed that if women didn't have the ability to decide the most intimate details of their lives and bodies, that it would be impossible to choose to achieve equality.
So along those lines, she actually, at the time of Roe v. Wade, was critical of that decision. Can you tell us why, given everything that you just described about her staunch position on reproductive rights?
Yes, of course. So her issues with Roe v. Wade were the speed with which it operated. So by striking down all of the abortion bans that were on the books all at once, she was worried that it would cause backlash. And then the substance of the decision, which was very much about a doctor's right to practice his profession. She wanted the reasoning of the opinion to be about how women were adult humans with the ability to make decisions about their lives. And she said at her confirmation hearing that this was a question of equality, because if the government were to make this decision for a woman or a birthing person, I would add now, then it would be treating her as less than a fully adult human in charge of her choices. And so I think in the same way that she wanted women's equal citizenship to be recognized by the Constitution, that equal protection under the law was something that applied to women as well, she wanted that equality reasoning to underpin the right to reproductive freedom, and she thought it would be stronger. Now, as you know, you don't always get to choose the reasoning or the judges or the justices and how things come out. I'm personally, as a journalist, not totally sure that it would have made a difference what the opinion said. I think the choice of who decides what happens to a pregnancy is so profound in our society about who has the right to make that decision that I'm personally not sure that if it had happened all at once, or if it happened one at a time, if it had said women's equality versus something else, I think it still would have spawned a national movement of backlash, because I think the notion of that decision being in women's hands is very threatening. But that's my opinion. Justice Ginsburg couldn't have been a more fervent defender of the outcome of Roe v. Wade, which was that it put the decision in the hands of a woman.
That criticism that she had, though, almost cost her her appointment to the Supreme Court. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
It's very funny to look back at 1993 and to see that it was some feminists who were actually worried that RBG was not feminist enough. Now, part of it is the context. She was the first Democratic appointee in a generation. And Bill Clinton, thought about a lot of people before he settled on her. But, I think you've seen it, every confirmation hearing, more or less, in recent memory, has brought up Justice Ginsburg's views on Roe to distort them. So Mitch McConnell might say, oh, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg hated Roe v. Wade. And as I've just explained, she has a substantive legal critique of it. But again, she believed that the Hyde Amendment that bans Medicaid coverage of abortion was unconstitutional. So it's not like she was not as pro-choice as they come. She thought there should be federal funding for abortion. And so I think, ironically, she found herself in this position in 1993 of having to defend her feminist bona fides. And even though, throughout the 1970s, she had done more for the constitutional recognition of women than almost anybody else. But times change. And I think in some way she was able to be confirmed by such a huge margin. I believe there were only 3 votes against her in the Senate. It was a Democratic controlled Senate, but still, because during her time on the DC circuit, she was seen as a moderate. But I think, it took a while, but she eventually really showed her the original notorious chutzpah that led her to stand in front of 9 male justices and say that we ask for no special favors from the brethren. We just ask that you take your feet off our neck. So she definitely had both of those aspects, the rock thrower and the institutionalist.
All right, we're running short on time. I would love to continue to hear more stories about her. But you kicked us off with fashion and the wonderful collar that a friend gave this to me at my investiture, and I wear it with pride. But talking about fashion and fitness, you do have a whole chapter on that. And I'm just curious, when you were talking about women, should that kind of topic be off limits when we're talking about a woman in power, fashion, and fitness? I mean, clearly you didn't think so, but tell us why.
Yeah, I mean, I think Justice Ginsburg gave us a gift, which is that the way she chose to live in public was in the totality of herself. She was open about the discrimination she faced. She was open about her love story with her husband. She was open about what it was like to be a mother and a constitutional attorney at a time where that was basically unheard of. She also told us about things that she was angry about and things that she loved and she was passionate about. And so I think, she cried at the opera. She was an introvert who cried at the opera. She loved clothes. She worked out on camera. Again, I think all of the ways in which she chose to live in public were really revolutionary, because I think she wanted it to be shown that you don't have to lead in public the way it's been done before. And because in some ways, the way that she and Justice O'Connor actually started the whole neckwear thing was that they felt, that these original robes, they were made for men, and they had these little openings that were for ties. Of course, some women love to wear ties, but she wanted to wear something that expressed her individuality. And that's actually how she started that tradition. It was only later that these collars became like the majority collar and the dissent collar and so on. And so I think it was a way for her to show that you could be a brilliant intellect, a powerful leader, but you could also be truly yourself. And in her case, it was traditionally feminine. That may have helped her in some ways, and maybe it also hurt her in others, because people underestimated her for being tiny and feminine. And I always, one of my favorite secret RBG stories was that when our book came out, the little chapter that we have on style, which she loved fashion, she really did. And here's an example of it. It was excerpted. Our publicist had a friend who worked at Bergdorf Goodman magazine, and they excerpted that little part about her fashion. And they, and then later on, the book got a lot of attention, and we were so overwhelmed. We were so excited to get such nice notices. And Justice Ginsburg wrote to us 2 or 3 days in, and she didn't want to talk about NPR, and she didn't want to talk about the New York Times. She said, I heard that there is something in Bergdorf Goodman magazine. Can you send me a copy? And we were like, well, I hadn't even seen it at this point. And so of course we immediately like move heaven and earth to find a physical copy of this and get it to the Supreme Court. And she said, imagine me in BG at 83 years old. I just thought you could take the girl out of New York, but you can't take her out of that dream aspirational department store. And then when I told the story to Nina Totenberg, she told me that when Justice Ginsburg was sick at the end of her life, but she was still hanging on, Nina went into Neiman Marcus and all of the makeup ladies ran up to her and said, how is RBG doing? How's the justice doing? Because, you know, she comes in here all the time. And Nina said to Justice Ginsburg, when do you have time to go to Neiman Marcus? And she said, I go in the intermission to the Kennedy Center. So she could go to the opera and then she'd shop during intermission. She was a really serious multitasker, but also showed, you know, again, she was a full human being. And I think, you know, even though she was of one of the generation that was one of the very first women in these rooms, she did not sacrifice the full totality, in her case, of her femininity either.
Thank you so much, Irin. This has been terrific. I know we've all really enjoyed listening to you, and I wish we could do it all night, but at this point, I am going to turn it back over to our Director of Women's Philanthropy, Diane Zahl.
Thank you, Justice Dallet.
Thank you, Irin, so much for that fascinating and inspirational talk. We are so happy you could be part of our Lion and Pomegranate celebration. You made it extra special for all of us. And thank you so much, Becky, for being here and for expertly moderating the questions and answers. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, I just want to join everyone in congratulating Judy Guten. Judy, I couldn't think of a more perfect person to receive the 2022 Kipnis-Wilson Friedland Award. You embodied the definition of guiding light. Women's philanthropy is so fortunate to be able to count on your dedication year after year. And thank you, Betsy, for sharing such a beautiful message about your and our dear friend, Judy. I am also so grateful to everyone who participated tonight. Thank you, Cheryl and Sarah, Joan and Miriam, Heidi, Marlene, Susan, and of course, our co-chairs, Andy, Yoni, Becky, and Tanya. As you heard, every Women's Philanthropy member has a unique and powerful story about why they have chosen to share their time and talent with the Federation. Each of us has found a place here in Women's Philanthropy. With our diverse backgrounds, we enrich our work together. And of course, I want to thank all of you, our amazing lions and pomegranates, for understanding it is our collective responsibility to care for this community, that we are part of something bigger. Through your commitment to women's philanthropy, you have demonstrated that we are most definitely stronger together. You are the leaders of this community. You are the role models whose generosity inspires others to step up. You are the heartbeat of this federation, and Federation simply couldn't have the impact it does without you. I'm so excited to be a part of this community and women's philanthropy as we all move forward together. Lastly, hang in there for one more minute. I have a huge thank you to Robin Aronson, who will be leaving her position as Associate Director of Women's Philanthropy. I could not have asked for a better partner. She has been a valued member of Women's Philanthropy, and I hope she will always feel good about the work she has accomplished here. Robin, thank you so much for your dedication and, of course, your friendship. We all wish you well, and we know where to find you. Now, as we leave, we are going to send you into breakout rooms to have the opportunity to chit-chat with some fellow lions and poms, just as if you were walking out through the hallway or down an elevator. You will be prompted on your screen, just hit join, and you will be able to chat with some friends and just reflect for a few minutes. I will say goodnight now and thank you all for coming, and we'll leave you with your breakout rooms. They will end automatically. Thank you everybody so much, and please enjoy a few minutes of chit chat with your friends in the community.